Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining me today. Just a heads up, this is a podcast video, therefore there's nothing for you to watch, and you can just go about whatever you're doing and have this on in the background or in your headset, whatever works for you. This is my tarot story. It has been long requested, so today I've decided to actually come on and share it with you guys on YouTube. There will, of course, be aspects of the story that I won't share because they're personal, but I'll try to give you an overall idea of how tarot came to be in my life from quite a young age and how that developed over time. So I was first predisposed to tarot and oracle from a very young age. I don't even recall how young, but too young to remember clearly. The predominant person who I lived with starting off in life was my mother. She was someone who really was the person who brought tarot and oracles into my life. She was the first person to ever buy me a deck as well. And so from that young age, I will have been around a lot of people who slung cards. I don't like to give people titles, but it was a very kind of hippie environment that I was in, and there were a lot of people that were a part of my life. And as I say, there was a variety of card slinging, there was a lot of herbal medicines and things like that practice as well. There was some shamanism, and really it was quite an eclectic upbringing that I experienced as a young child. I would say that she possibly identified as a witch during various times in her life, but obviously I'm not here to tell her story. She was also the person to first introduce me to animal medicine, and that's one part of my upbringing that I remember the most. It was a big part of it, and it's something that I remained passionate about no matter where I was or who I was living with. I know that I received my medicine cards. It was the first deck that I was ever bought, and I know that that was way before I hit my teens. I was really, really young. I used to use her original copy, and then she gifted me a revised copy. Moving on from this, I was then gifted a copy of my Medicine Woman tarot deck, and so that is the deck that I came to tarot with, and it's a very unique structure from the Rider-Waite-Smith. When I was taught to pull from what I can remember, I was encouraged to read the pictures in my cards and see what I felt was going on, consider how I felt it reflected, and I was also naturally encouraged to read the book. That's really the only ways that I can recall tarot being taught to me in that specific way. Whilst a lot of people pulled cards around me, no one really sat down and told me the history of tarot or any other information. It was a very intuitive kind of flow in the way that I entered it. I recall her having the Mythic Tarot, obviously the original one, and I would pull from that from time to time as well, but I had no real awareness of Rider-Waite-Smith or really any of those terms. My Medicine Woman tarot was my tarot, and that's all I knew really, that there was more than one deck out there. And for this next bit, I'd like to keep it short because it's very private to me, but just to give everyone an understanding, basically I didn't live with her for a lot of my life. I lived with different family members at different times. There was turmoil, and so of course two things happen. When you've got trauma as a child, things become really fragmented, especially with your, at least for me, with my memory. And also, different people have different values, belief systems, and ways of living. And what that meant is that a lot of the other people who I lived with or I was brought up with weren't necessarily into those things, and it became something that was just mine, and really something that I guess it felt like I was playing with it more than anything else until a later date. Moving into my teens, by then I had on and off contact, and when I did have contact, maybe I would do some of those kind of things and learn some stuff, dream journal, things like that. I was bought more decks, so I got my beloved Shaman Wisdom cards, which I've had for a very long time as well. I also had other people in my life by that stage. But what happened was I didn't really establish a belief system with coming to tarot, and I don't hold the same belief system as many of the people who I experienced tarot with originally. It felt very predictive in some capacities, the way in which they read, and when I hit my teens, I slung cards for my friends. I remember doing it. They would come over after school and it would be kind of something fun to do, and I was maybe considered a little bit quirky. But it was an on and off thing, and at the same time, I could never really quite work out how I felt about it, because there was a part of me that really felt these things, they couldn't predict my future. And so it did kind of, I guess, hinder the relationship from fully developing. Along with that, in my later teens, I was off being a teenager as well. The one thing that did remain constant for me was my medicine cards. I always felt that kinship with animals, and whether I was sort of using my tarot or I wasn't, my medicine cards would always be pulled. It wasn't necessarily regular, but they were always out, and even if it was several months in between, I don't really think, if even if a year went by without me pulling them at points, that was a really big part of my practice. One of the things that I always loved was the artwork in different decks, whether they were tarot or oracle. And because my tarot deck was so different as well, I don't even know if I was sure that tarot decks were the same structure or not. I don't really recall. But I would visit Glastonbury a lot with different family. My dad and my stepmum, they're not adverse to these things. They actually both have Thoth decks, whilst I'm not a Thoth deck owner or reader myself. And from before my teens and throughout, every time I visited Glastonbury, I would buy myself one deck. That became my little special tradition, and I would love taking in the artwork, sitting there, looking at all the different depictions from the deck that I already had. And over time, a little collection grew. And it definitely was for me taking in the artwork and really trying to understand. So by that point, I had a couple of simple tarot books, but again, there wasn't really that sort of school of thought or structural awareness. Now that I've given you a bit of an understanding as to how it started out for me, and the fact that my tarot reading was encouraged on an intuitional basis and, as I say, a bit of book reading, let's wind it up so that this doesn't take forever. I moved out when I was 20, or just before I turned 20, and I started the career in which I'm in now. I have a therapeutic, psychologically based career, and really there's a lot of training involved in that. And so from 19, when I started training, my life really revolved around my studies and working to fund my studies as well. What happened was they remained important and special to me, but weren't regularly brought out, as I say, aside from my medicine cards. When I met my partner and life secured and all of those lovely things, I was getting my decks out again more often, mostly actually to inspire my artwork, which is another story, but I love using decks for creativity. Slowly over time, I started to find myself being more called to them and starting to use them again. The bonus of this was that as I moved into my later 20s and I was already on Instagram, there was now this whole world out there on YouTube, on Instagram, and everywhere else where people were talking about tarot, which was just so surreal. There was times when I was younger that you didn't tell people because it just wasn't, I don't know, like it just wasn't the done thing. And I swiftly sort of delved into Tarotland on YouTube first. I'd watch unboxings and reviews. Kelly from The Truth in Story was the first person I found, I believe, and this whole world opened up. Then I started sharing my tarot related stuff on my Instagram, and it really happened at a convenient time for me as well because I suffered some more health stuff and quite a severe injury from a motorbike accident. And basically, I couldn't do the other creative things that I was doing because I was in a lot of pain. And tarot cards, you can pretty much do if you're standing, laying, sitting. They're very adaptable. So I entered the social media world of tarot, which it still is both wonderful and bizarre. But what I have quickly found out was a lot of people were talking about Rider-Waite-Smith, and I was like, what? I saw the imagery, and funny enough, I have to have seen them at some point. This is where it gets difficult for me because when people want to know your tarot story, they want dates and ages and specifics, and I just can't do that. As I say, some of it's fragmented, some of it I don't remember, and there was just other stuff going on. I don't know how I knew what the Rider-Waite-Smith was image wise, I did, but I hadn't heard of this structure, and so I really felt like, wow, this is something that I clearly need to learn. That's exactly what I did. I got the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, I bought myself some other new decks. I'd already got the Wild Unknown and I studied. I was really, really pleasantly surprised at the amount of knowledge that I had somehow retained and learned. I really, really did surprise myself. And then there was the blending of my therapeutic and psychological interests, and I started to reach out and find that not everyone read tarot predictively, and people weren't necessarily reading the cults like when I was brought up and so and so cult had brown hair, brown eyes, was this age, which is something that just has never worked for me either. Don't get me wrong, despite how much I pleasantly surprised myself and how I can utilise all of my other training and understanding, there was still loads for me to learn. And I guess this is why my biggest faux pas sort of occurred. When I first made my YouTube account, I referred to myself as a beginner because I felt I didn't have a full understanding of the Rider-Waite-Smith and the school of thought and maybe some of the history. That really made me feel like a beginner. To be honest, I felt that if I professed to be anything else, that people would not approve. And that was my own stuff going on, and really I discounted the years of experience that I had, but I did come to it from a very different capacity to others, and it took me a while to realise that I wasn't necessarily a beginner in the overall sense, but of course I was beginning to learn some other stuff and really build the foundation of my own beliefs of tarot and get that to a point where it felt like a firm structure and something that I knew and that completely worked for me. And also, I'm a firm believer that we never get to that actualisation we're going to be continuously learning with our tarot journeys. I know that it confused people a bit when I called myself a beginner, and then people sort of called me out on it because I'd mentioned my past, and it was just one of those things, really. It happens. I'm a human. So yeah, in summary, it did feel like I was a beginner to the Rider-Waite-Smith, and that way of reading, like knowing the inside and outs of what these 78 cards represented without fail, and learning a new way to come to courts, which completely changed my way of utilising the cards. After that time of returning, I've been really thankful for all of the free learning resources, some of the ones that I've paid for, just the amount of books that are out there now, you guys. We have such an eclectic range of tools to support us in our learning. And I finally feel as though I really have that firm foundation. I've really started to evolve the way in which I explore the tarot archetypes and pull from my psychological beliefs and understanding and work with tarot in a whole new way that maybe otherwise I never would have. And it definitely improved the relationship with using tarot, and of course it's become something that I use on a daily basis now, because it's not how someone else showed me how to use it and how they felt it worked for them, but it's really how I feel it works for me, and focusing on my relationship with the cards. I also recognise that I'm very fortunate because I have some good friends, and even my nan, as everyone finds super amusing, who let me pull cards for them. There was a lot of practice, a lot of practice before I considered reading for people in any other capacity. Yeah, it's been interesting. And now I'm at this lovely place where I'm just fleshing out and adding to my tarot knowledge and all sorts of wonderful things. My tarot poetry, obviously I took up the tarot numerology because I wanted to add that. The psychology tarot books that I've been getting. It really is something that I can see interesting me throughout my life, because I love to study as well. I am a super nerd, everyone. I love to study. I think I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that's given people a little walk through my tarot experience and how the cards came to be in my life. I hope it wasn't too long for anyone. If you want to share your tarot story below, then feel free to comment, or if you've done a video, then let me know. I find it really interesting because we all come to tarot in such different and wonderful ways and learn in different ways. So many people maybe have said to me that they started with a Rider-Waite-Smith, but using their intuition was something that came much later, whereas mine's kind of back to front. But yeah, that's me. That's my tarot story, and I will catch you guys again soon. Bye for now.